Hey tea heads, this is Don from Mayleaf. What is mouthfeel in tea? You may have seen this descriptor as part of our 10-step tasting protocol. If you're not sure about the 10-step tea tasting protocol, I'll put a link to a video in the description below. But it's often talked about when people drink tea, people who are geeking out over tea, they'll talk about the mouthfeel. And this is different from the finish. In other words, how the tea leaves your mouth feeling. That's the subject of another video for sure. And I have been meaning to make a video about mouthfeel, and I wasn't planning to do it today, but I was tasting these two Supreme green teas that have just come in. And again, I wasn't planning to do a video about these teas, but I was so impressed with their mouthfeel that I thought, perfect opportunity to dig into this idea of mouthfeel, try to tease it out a bit. I don't claim to know everything about the sort of science behind it, but I'm going to give you my impression of mouthfeel, and we're going to be doing a very brief tasting of these teas just so that you get a feel for what I am talking about. So what is mouthfeel? I'm talking about the sense, the physical sense of the tea in your mouth. So again, it's different from taste, different from the finish, the feeling in your mouth after you swallow. It's the texture and feel of the liquid, the liquor in your mouth. And generally, there's not that many descriptors that we use to describe the mouthfeel. Often you'll hear sort of three pairs. So you'll have the thick and voluptuous versus the thin and more watery or light. So that's one pair. You'll also get the coating oily versus the hydrating and clean. That would be another descriptor pair that I would put out there. So the difference between tea that feels like when it's in your mouth, it feels like it's sort of oily and coating, and tea when it's in your mouth, it feels like it's being absorbed and is hydrating. So that's the second pair. The third pair, I would say, is the difference between tea liquors which are soft and rounded versus more rough and more granular. So those are the three pairs: thick, thin, coating, oily and hydrating and refreshing, and round, soft versus granular and a little bit more rough. And we'll sort of briefly talk about all of those in this video, but I'm really focusing my attention on the thick, thin, because that tends to be the descriptor that is most often used when describing mouthfeel. And what I want to do today, tasting these gorgeous 2024 Supreme teas that have just come in. This is Jade Arrow and this is Jing Supreme. For those of you who don't know, every year we release a Jade Arrow and an Imperial Green or Jing or Dragon Well. And then if I can, I'll try to find what I call like a Supreme batch. That's not to say that the other batches are not top grade, but there are some very, very tiny small batch teas, and we're going to be talking about them. But what I want to try to do today is to try to tease out what I think, and it is, you know, broad guesses and a little bit of experience here and a bit of research, try to figure out what it is about the tea leaf that contributes to the thickness or thinness of the liquor. We'll quickly, briefly talk about the other two pairs. So in terms of coating versus hydrating, I think that a lot of that is to do with the mineral content in the tea and the sugars and salts. If the sugar and salt content of the tea is basically isotonic, so it's very similar to your saliva, then it almost feels like the tea is getting absorbed by your cheeks and by your tongue, and it feels like, yeah, it's sort of decreasing in volume in your mouth. The opposite of that are teas which feel like they're sort of coating and they stay in your mouth for longer. So they have this sort of coating, some may say sort of oily quality to them. And I think that is to do with, as I said, minerals, sugars and salts. I'm not sure, this is my guess. The third pair or opposites in terms of, you know, soft and rounded versus more granular and more rough, I think is probably a lot to do with the polyphenol content, catechins, the tannins as they're called, in tea. That yes, they affect you after you've swallowed, and we get that astringent feeling in our mouth or down our throat or on our tongue when we swallow teas that have got a lot of those antioxidants in them. But I think that those reactions are happening while the liquor is in your mouth. So you're getting a sense of roughness or a sense of pulling and a sense of astringency that would be the opposite of a soft or rounded mouthfeel. But those are my broad, assertions regarding those two aspects of mouthfeel. I'll probably do some more research, and who knows, I may be updating that at a later point. But today I want to talk about the thickness of a tea. What contributes to a thickness in tea? And I think that there are two main things from the research that I've done and the experience that I've had tasting teas over the last 20 years is I think that there are two aspects that contribute to thickness. The first are the trichomes on the leaf. Now, if you look at any white tea, if you see lots of buds, for example, then you'll see lots of those trichomes. They look like little hairs, right? And there are many different types of trichomes. You can get trichomes like on cannabis that have like glands that contain terpenes, and they contribute to the aromatics of the plant. And then you've got terpenes in all other, or I think most other leaves, and they have different roles. Some of them is about controlling water. Some of the role is about apparently metal detoxification. A lot of it is to protect the leaf from biotic attack, usually sort of other insects. So you can imagine if you've got lots of hairs or trichomes, it makes it harder it's like an armor. It makes it harder for the bugs to bite. But there are a whole host of functions for trichomes, as I said, maintaining water, protecting the leaf against attack, metal detoxification. Sometimes it's about spreading terpenes and smells and storing terpenes. So there's many different functions. But the point is that when you brew the tea, they get sort of scrubbed off the tea when you pour hot water. And that is actually providing structure and providing thickness to your tea. It's actually providing physical thickness, additional thickness to your tea, especially for the first couple of infusions. So that's the first thing, trichomes. And so you'll often hear me say, well, look at that furry tea or very trichome heavy tea. And oftentimes I will then say, this is a very thick tea. So that I see that there's a relationship there. And you can see it in the liquor, and we'll show it when we're brewing these teas, that you can see those trichomes in the liquor. In fact, let's do it right now. Let's do it with our Jing Supreme. So this is Jing Supreme. This is a Shihu Westlake Jing. So Shihu is the most revered area for Jing, although there's great Jing being made all over Zhejiang province. And I actually think that for, bang for buck, you can get incredible Zhejiang Jing at a much cheaper price that equals some of the finest Shihu Jing. I know that's a controversial statement, but I'm putting it out there from my taste tests. However, Shihu Jing is quite rightly revered. It's the historic birthplace of Jing tea, and because it attracts such a high price, people can get paid more. The area can be looked after better. The skill of the producers can increase, and so generally you get a higher sort of average quality for those teas, but the price is a lot higher and oftentimes, in my opinion, not worth it. So when we're tasting Shihu Jings, I'm very conscious of the fact that it needs to have something that is very special about it, and this tea I find very special. So this is picked on the 27th of March 2024, so it's a pre-Qingming tea. This is the Jing 43 cultivar. The origin, this is from Longwu Dragon Village in Shihu. It's one of the famous villages in Westlake. Shihu means Westlake, around Hangzhou in Zhejiang in China. Picking and processing, this is a bud and one leaf. Now, with trichomes, here's the first thing to note, is that buds will have the highest amount of trichomes, and very early young leaves, early spring picked young leaves will have high trichome amounts on them. Oftentimes you'll see little yellow balls or little white balls mixed in with your Jing, and that's because when they're roasting the tea or they're pan firing the tea, they're using this movement, and that's scraping off some of the trichomes and creating these little balls. Do not throw the tea away. It is not mold. That's high quality tea. And so young leaves will always have higher amounts of trichomes. We're going to try and wrap this up later on in terms of what you should expect to find in terms of thicker versus thinner teas in relation to different tea categories. So stay tuned for that. But basically, this is a bud and young leaf, early spring picking, so it is going to be Tricome heavy. Elevations around 500 meters, something like that. And yeah, you can see the Tricomes here. So I'm going to take a flute brewer here and I'm going to try and position it so that we can get a decent focus on that camera. And I want to try, hopefully we'll be able to zoom in and you'll be able to see those Tricomes coming off into the liquor. So we're putting our tea in and I'm just going to pour the hot water over. I'll do a quick smell. Yeah, I'll do a very quick smell. I have done the tasting of this tea already. Amazing. It's like chocolate malted bran flakes, sweet adzuki beans, roasted broad beans. There is also a lot of sugared quality here. I'm getting like palmier, sugariness. So much of what I look for in a Oolong Jing is I do not look for teas that are raw or too green. It's got to have this quality of being very, very warm. That's the most important thing. Sort of the warmth in it. Don't want too much green. That's the tradition of these teas. So sweet adzuki beans. There's a little bit of brightness, like a little bit of sort of vine. If you smell vine tomatoes, just the vine, not the tomato, and it's just that bright little piquancy as well. But that's as green as it gets, you know. And then there's even a little bit, yeah, like I said, chocolate bran flakes. A lot of chocolate in here. Just lovely, lovely, lovely smell. So check out the website if you want to see the full tasting. Right, I'm gonna pour water in here. And I want to see if we can see the Tricomes coming out of this liquor. Now, I need you to focus, camera. Can you see all those little Tricomes being stripped off and falling down? A lot of times what I say when I'm doing tasting videos is this has a lot of activity in the liquor, and you can see it's got this cloudy look that's coming from the Tricomes being stripped off. I hope you can see that clearly. So the thickness, if it comes from the Tricomes, will be more evident in the first couple of infusions. And it's one of the reasons why I tend to brew a lot of teas without one of those fine mesh strainers. Because even though the trade-off is you're going to get maybe a few little broken leaves in there or particulates in there, I don't want the Tricomes to be stripped out from the brew. I like to have that maximal thickness in my tea. Right. We're going to not do a full tasting, but I will give you my impression of this tea. But I can see lots and lots, loads and loads of Tricomes. Hopefully you can see them too. Right, cheers everybody, beautiful citrine color. So the first thing I usually do when I'm doing a 10-step tasting is mouthfeel, texture, mouth texture I call it. And the reason for that is because like I think it's the first thing that you can like. Taste is something that builds. Texture is something you can feel immediately. And if you focus on taste too quickly, then you might miss like being able to assess it, because once your mouth has been physically changed, it's hard to assess the texture so much afterwards. And the texture on this is so thick. And that's why I turned the cameras on now, because I was doing a tasting and I was like, man, it's so thick. And I was thinking about mouthfeel and I thought, oh, this is a perfect opportunity to do a video that I was meaning to do for a while, but I haven't gotten around to it. So in terms of the other notes, it's coating. It's not like sucking up isotonic, it's coating. And it's very soft and round. So soft, round, coating and oily, but thick, very thick. And that thickness goes so well with the warmth of the flavors. You know, I'm getting like sweet, warm nut milks. I'm getting like raw, like I'm imagining sort of almonds that have been almond milk, but like freshly made. So it's got that thickness in it. It's got that kind of level of thickness of freshly made, like if you make your own homemade nut milks. I'm getting those sweet adzuki beans. So there's still that beany, starchy quality to it as well. And I'm getting Still a few little bits of chocolate notes, some of that vine, tomato, a little bit of chili pepper, sort of a piquancy and a brightness to it. But overall, it's all about the luxury of the sort of warm milks, chocolates, rice puddings, sweet azuki beans. And then it leaves your mouth with an amazing lemon oil finish. Syrupy, lemony, amazing. Thick, thick, thick. So that's the first contributor to thickness in tea, I think, are the trichomes. Should never rush through an amazing tea like this. I will be drinking it as we move further, after I've finished shooting this video. But I want to turn my attention now to this tea and talk about the second factor that I think contributes to thickness in tea, and that is the cellular material in the tea leaf, specifically cellular carbohydrates like cellulose and pectin. Because pectin is used a lot in food to give that feeling of luxury and thickness to drinks. And it's sort of classed as, I think, an insoluble fiber because you can't process it. But pectin is in tea. Other material like cellulose is in tea. And as the tea brews, it's going to be releasing more and more of that water-soluble pectin and other carbohydrates. But mainly I'm going to talk about pectin here. And so I think that is the other contributor to the thickness in tea. We'll quickly scope this tea. This is early spring again, I want to say 24th of March from my recollection. This is from the Dongshan Huang variety. This is picked in Anji, like from the classic Anji fields. Picking and processing again is going to be bud and young leaf, so it's going to be trichome heavy as well. This is also a trichome heavy tea. As you can see, if you look closely, you will see there are quite fine hairs there. Right, let's warm this teaware up, and we're going to do a quick dry leaf and then wet leaf of Jade Arrow Supreme 2024, just arrived. I mean, it's like, I did tasting notes, and the first thing that pops for me is hazelnut, but hazelnut pralines. So hazelnut, like brittle, basically. I'm getting edamame. I'm getting a little bit of dough. I didn't put that in the tasting notes, but now I'm getting some raw dough. So it's milky and doughy and yeasty and starchy. I'm getting, like the green edamame, so soybeans, but green. And wow, a lot of yeast suddenly coming through. A lot of doughy, raw dough smell. And those hazelnut pralines. All right, let's give it a quick rinse just to accentuate and enhance those aromas. Oh my gosh. Incredible, yeah. Loads and loads of those edamame, loads and loads of, the sort of glutinous rice and some raw nuts as well. In my tasting notes, I wrote almond soup, and I was sort of imagining those chilled, I think it's ayo blanco, like sort of chilled almond soups that you get in Spain, but without the garlic, just like, again, like almost like pureed, but savory almond soup. Amazing. Right, let's brew this up. Again, what we'll do is we're going to see if we can see the trichomes being stripped off, just so that we can see that in action too. Hopefully you can see it. Right, yeah, I mean, I can see loads and loads of activity. Similar, I would say the Longjing probably has a little bit more in terms of trichomes, but it's this suspension, this like suspended, because their trichomes are so light, they just literally hang in the liquor and they just sort of move around slowly. Oh, it's amazing looking. I love it. Right. brew that up for a little bit longer. We want to suck out that pectin, so we want the brew to get into those cell walls, you know, and start to sort of, you know, extract. So let's talk about pectin. And I've been sort of doing some research about pectin, and obviously there's going to be different levels of pectin depending on the tea, depending on, you know, the cultivar, etc. But in terms of processing, pectin tends to be higher when the tea has been steamed or heated for longer, when it's been roasted, or when it's been fermented, as in like ripe, pu'er, and HR fermentation. So those are the factors that tend to influence the amount of pectin in the leaf. And so you can piece this all together, right? Let's taste this tea first of all. Similar thickness, not quite as thick as the Long Jing, so probably less trichomes, but as you start to brew into the leaf, so after stripping off those trichomes, this is why the thickness criteria sort of like gives you two things. It's like at the beginning you're getting a lot of trichomes, but as you brew into the leaf you're probably going to be pulling out more pectin, so you sort of get a difference. And I do think that there's a difference, a subtle difference in the quality of the thickness. So with more of a pectin related thickness or carbohydrate related thickness, it's more about a thickness and a fullness that is very, very rounded and soft. When you're talking about the thickness of a tea that's more related to trichomes, you are picking up, I wouldn't say it's like granular, it's just, it has like a textured quality. Again, almost like nut milk, like if you've, you know, made freshly made nut milk and you've filtered out, you've strained it out through those muslin cloths, you're still getting just that little bit of the sort of residual sort of texture of the nuts. And I think that you can just about pick that up with trichome heavy teas. Let's give this a proper taste. Oh, edamame, wild strawberries. I always get wild strawberries with a really high quality jade arrow or anjibaicha. Nut milks, almond milk, rice milk. Touch of pear, rice pudding. More milky, more nutty, but like more raw nut compared to the sort of more roasted beans and raw nuts. Here, this is more milky and raw nuts, and it's a completely different tea and has more of that gentle, elegant lightness about the taste, but still rich and captivating. That's very, very important when it comes to selecting a really high quality anjibaicha. You can get anjibaichas that are very green. Obviously, we stay away from those. You know, they're okay, but they sort of taste like a bit like green acorn, which is not a bad taste, but it feels unfinished to me. Then you get the ones that are warm and nutty and roasted, almost moving towards a little bit like Long Jing, and I really love those. And then you get these ones which are very, very milky. And I think that, you know, this is a perfect example of an amazing small batch, tiny batch of anjibaicha, but very, very thick. And the thickness is a slightly different kind of thickness. It's more of a milky, rounded thickness rather than a textured thickness that comes from the Long Jing. But get both and you can see if you can discern the difference. So in terms of pectin, the factors that influence pectin are obviously the natural amount in the leaf, but then you've got heating, steaming, roasting, and you've got fermentation. And that's why you will tend to have, I think, more pectin content or more pectin in your cup when you have deep steamed teas or more, heated teas, or roasted teas, which is why roasted oolongs. We always talk about oolong tea. Oolong tea, when you think about it, is larger leaf. Larger leaf doesn't have those trichomes. It tends to be thinner. It's a sort of a bizarre thing because you think larger leaf is going to have thickness of leaf equals thickness of liquor. No, thickness of leaf tends to produce thinner teas. And so when you roast it, what people always talk about the roasting of oolongs, it smooths it, it rounds it, and it makes it thicker. Well, that is actually probably partly due to the fact that you're increasing the pectin content or you're increasing the amount of pectin that can be extracted by roasting the tea. So let's pull all this together and talk about thickness and say, right, if we are saying that trichomes and pectin, or trichomes and, let's say, cellular carbohydrates are the main factors that are affecting thickness, or very high contributing factors affecting thickness, then what can we say? Well, we can say that white teas that are very bud heavy have a lot of trichomes. Yeah, they may not go through the heating process, they may not go through a roasting process, although the high quality ones will, and that's why I always try to pick charcoal roasted white teas when I'm selecting my super top level heirloom silver needle. But the level of buds in white teas means you're going to get thick teas. Obviously, as you start to move to Baimudan, you get more leaves, it's going to be slightly thinner, and then when you move to Shomeis, it's going to be thinner still, because now you're moving into larger leaf with less trichomes. But because they are early spring picked, usually, again, it's not just the part of the plant, but it's the time of picking. So earlier picked and more buds equals thicker. So white teas, green teas like this are going to have thickness because they're trichome heavy and they're early spring picked. If you get like steamed teas in Japan, and you have teas that have more of the deeper steamed, so the fukamushis, then they will tend to be thicker in terms of pectin content. As we move into oolongs, green oolongs are larger leaf, right? So that means less trichomes, and they're unroasted. And or relatively unroasted, and that's why Tieguanyins and green oolongs generally have a very much thinner quality overall on average compared to other tea types. So green oolongs tend to be thinner, and important to note this. Do not think that I am saying that thick always means better. The thickness of a tea or the texture of a tea has to match with the character of the tea. And with green oolongs, the character of the tea is bright, high, light, fresh, right? They are the freshest, in my opinion, of all teas. Even more fresh than green teas, which as I said before, I look for more warm notes in green teas, more about nutrition and the sort of nutrient value. Whereas with green oolongs like Tieguanyins or Qingxing oolongs, from Taiwan, I'm looking for brightness, I'm looking for uplift, I'm looking for florality and fruits and those sort of transient bright aromas. And so in many ways, it sort of matches that it has a light, bright, thinner, more refreshing quality in terms of the mouth feel. So it does not always mean that thicker is better. Overall, yes, I would say, most people are looking for thicker teas, but it needs to match the character. So green oolongs tend to be thinner, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. As you start to roast the oolongs, like Wuyi Yanchas or Dansong oolongs, you get thicker. Now, Dansong oolongs is a perfect example. If the Dansong oolong is not roasted enough, it can have amazing aromatics and amazing flavor, but it is too thin and too thin in the mouth, too watery in the mouth for the matching of the taste, because a lot of the taste of a dansong should be more about the fruitiness and more medium, not so high and sort of bright and transient. And so for me, a lot of times dansong teas are under roasted, and I always ask for extra roast for dansong teas. If you taste our dansong teas, you'll probably notice that they're a little bit more roasted than a lot that are on the market, because I crave that thickness. So darker oolongs are going to be thicker. Black teas, we're starting to move back into the thinner territory, because especially if the leaves are large. If it's a bud heavy black tea, like a Jinjunmei that's very bud heavy, or a Dianhong that's bud heavy, then you're going to have the thickness that comes from those trichomes. But if it's more of like a larger leaf or medium leaf black tea, then it's going to have less of those trichomes, and therefore you're going to have generally a thinner tea, because you're not getting much pectin development because it's not roasted so much. Then we start to move into shengpuers. Shengpuers essentially are a green tea. Very large leaf tea variety, lots of trichomes, tends to be very thick teas. And you can always tell high quality with that because, you know, with pickings of large leaf varieties, but from plantations, from smaller bushes, they tend to have less of that thickness. And then finally, ripe teas or HRs. If they've been fermented well, you'll increase the pectin content, which will increase thickness. So white teas, early picked green teas, roasted oolongs, sheng pu'er, and ripe HR tends to be on the thicker end of the spectrum. The more large leaf picking of white teas, the more, let's say, raw and unprocessed, less heated, less toasted, less warm green teas, which we tend not to buy. And the green oolongs will tend to be thinner. And I hope that I tried to describe at least my impression of why that may be the case. Anyway, let me know your thoughts about mouthfeel. It's talked about, but not talked about enough. And I think it's something that we should sort of discuss a little bit more. So let me know what your thoughts are about mouthfeel, what you prefer, whether or not you think that thinner or thicker suits particular tea types. And if you've got any other suggestions of other factors that may be contributing to mouthfeel, I'm all ears. That's it, tea heads. Check out our other videos, taste our teas wherever you are in the world by browsing mayleaf.com, and come visit us if you're ever in London. Other than that, I'm Don from Mayleaf. Thank you for being a part of the revelation of true tea. Stay away from those tea bags, keep drinking the supreme stuff, and spread the word, because nobody deserves bad tea. Bye.